And I think what's also good to illustrate is we don't want to make it sound like anyone's better than the other, because that widget maker, right? Or that engineer that's writing code, or that engineer that's drawing these really cool parts and systems, right? They love being an engineer. There's nothing wrong with that, right? They don't have to be transformational, right? And the whole premise of saying, well, we have to make everybody transformational is probably a myth, right? Yes, some firms will be mostly transformational, but this whole idea of that everybody has to become this different. No, it doesn't matter. The widget maker is happy making widgets. If he doesn't want to make, or she doesn't want to make widgets anymore, she can look around and say, geez, I would really like to be more collaborative and creative. Let me go work in marketing, right? And that's not unusual. They have a great little example of this, right? So when IBM started along, so I'm a little older. I'm gonna give you a little older example, but it really brings this up. It really illustrates this big, long history company. Really invented computers, if you will, or was a really leader in really making applications for computers useful. Like from the '60s forward, right? And then somewhere, at one time when you went to your workplace in the '80s, right, you would have these kind of dumb computers, like dumb boxes in your office, right? And there was wires coming out of everywhere, and they would run all the way through the ceilings, all through the building. So, if a company had 10 computers, they were all physically wired, right? And they also had the physically wired, printers and, other things that they had. Everything was connected. That's how the system worked. And it went to a big, that's how it worked. Distributed computing came out, which is like, it started with like Lotus, Apple came out with their computer, then the IBM came out with theirs, and there was this competition for making the distributed computers they weren't connected necessarily to the system, and then the cloud came, and the story goes that IBM was looking at the IBM executives were watching the Olympics stream through the TV, and someone said, "How do we make money off of this?" Right? Wow, you make money off this by, really digging into the internet. The internet took off, right? So think about an old company that filled with engineers and really, really brilliant people that invented this stuff, right? All of a sudden are getting beat out by little companies like Dell and Lotus at the time, and so they're getting beat out both with hardware and software by these outside, and Apple. They're getting beat out by these companies that are filled with young people that just like woke up and started this stuff, right? And so what do? So they were losing that battle, right? And what they end up doing is IBM. Long story. So if you look at they started here and they kind of went up the curve and they were peaking really, right? And then they started losing ground because of the distributed computing. And what did they do? They took their very talented engineers that they have, all these really smart people, and they turned them into consultants. And IBM became one of the largest consultant companies in the world. And they consulted on technology, right? They reinvented themselves. So they went from very rational companies. They probably started out very transformational, new ideas. They probably had old-fashioned procedures, and because it was the '60s and '70s and the '80s. But they had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and then as they started getting that market really solid, their products became somewhat commoditized, if you will, or kind of like they couldn't keep up with the new stuff, and they were moving more to the rational side, right? So their work was the same every day. They were making the same products. They were trying to cross-sell existing products, but they were all trying to do the same thing. But when they changed themselves to an engineering company, they went back to being transformational. They went back to being open. They went back to, people being, to a different kind of mindset.